Hello and welcome to Agony, Aunt and Uncle. If you're listening on podcast, we're also over on our YouTube channel, the Sawalha-Adderleys, and we're on video if you want to see our lovely little faces.
Should we call it agonising aunt?
Agonising Aunt and Uncle. Oh my God, just reading through all your messages and I don't know, my heart just aches. There's so much suffering out there, isn't there? Right, we are going to kick off straight away. Mark, this one is very much skewed to you. And this person would like to stay anonymous.
Okay.
And it's a really interesting one, actually. It's quite complex, I think.
Right.
Especially because of the ages within it. So,
Right, okay.
I'm 24 and have found out my boyfriend struggles with sex and weed addictions and cheated on me once with a stranger from Tinder. I immediately broke up with him. We'd been long distance for a year, friends at uni before then, so I couldn't really spot the red flags of his porn addiction. He'd never told anyone about this or his weed addiction before me and realises now it stems from his childhood trauma and being bullied at school for not being the macho guy.
Right.
I think realising the hurt he has caused me has made him look at himself properly. He's 22, which gives me hope he can change, as I was also his first girlfriend. And now he's in therapy, a 12-step program, and mediation. I've had long-term partners before, but he is the kindest boyfriend I've ever had. And I can't help feeling that this black and white way we look and advise on cheating is unhelpful when the person is an addict. He was a great boyfriend throughout, and we had a great bond. He says he cheated as a way to try and expel all his disturbed thoughts about sex, thinking this would make them go away and so we could become more serious. As we were thinking of moving in together and realises now how wrong that was, and he never wanted us to break up. I'm really interested in what Mark thinks about this, as I've listened to your How to Stay Married podcast and think how far he has come since previous behaviour in his relationships. Now my ex is getting proper help. I'll always wonder what could have been if I completely walk away from us. He says he wants to be celibate for a year and prove to me how much he has changed to be with me again. Yet all my friends say he's disgusting and I shouldn't waste my 20s waiting for him. My therapist also says he may never be able to look at me again without feeling guilty. But I'm finding it really hard to give up hope that we can't be together one day. And as I love him so much and really don't believe he is a toxic person, I wonder if a relationship can truly be good again and maybe even more honest and connected following this, especially as he's being much more honest and open to me about his issues than he's ever been before. So, of course, this is an absolutely brilliant one for Mark. I suppose, and for me, because we've been through something similar, though not exact. First of all, I want to say, I'm so pleased that you're seeing a counsellor. You know, Mark and I always say we are not professionals in any way. We're just people who've been through some shit together. And we are the people that come to have a chat through things when they're struggling. And that's very much our tone, because it's very important we don't directly advise, just so that people are kept safe. But yeah, I'm glad you're seeing a counsellor. But what I would first like to say, I find it a bit odd that a counsellor would say he will never be able to look at you again without feeling guilty. I just find that a bit strange, because I think we can never know completely the way somebody's going to turn out, can we, Mark? And I think that can be something, taking it away from that particular counsellor, about the way that people think of addicts. You know, I think people can just get a completely bad name forever. And that makes me sad, because a lot of people do work very hard at trying to evolve and change that. I also agree that sometimes this black and white way of looking at cheating, the only thing you must ever do is leave, isn't always right either, because not everyone that cheats is just a dirty rat. There's lots of different reasons. But I remember, Mark, when you were in rehab, saying that you were just totally fascinated by the sex addiction people in there.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, not in a sort of prurient fashion.
No,
I mean,
of course not.
Oh, no,
But
but I mean,
pain that
also
was
not in a
involved.
sort of specimen fashion
No.
either. I mean, Christ, we're 5 minutes in, and that is an enormous amount of sort of complexity to kind of navigate and move through, with so many different divergent kind of thoughts, ideas, interpretations, and then Nadia, you've kind of thrown on top of that kind of, you know, your own sort of assessment of certain parts of it. There, you know, sex addiction, I think one of the problems with any addiction is that there is a victim in the person who's the addict, and the addiction selfishly destroys or affects and impacts everyone around them. And so that's why addiction in most of its forms has, you know, very little tolerance or very little understanding. I mean, there's more so. And obviously if you're moving in circles of recovery and 12-step programs and rehab and what have you, then there's more tolerance and language around it. But you'd be surprised by how little language there is around this stuff when you're outside a family like this. I mean, if I think back to when I went into rehab, you know, I think back to some of the thought processes and attitudes I had to alcohol and other people who did drink and didn't drink. I mean, I was nowhere near where we are now in terms of understanding it. So yes, early in my days trying to understand what alcohol addiction and drug addiction was for me, I did come across 2 people, but one person specifically, who was struggling with sex addiction and was in rehab with me. And one of the things that really struck me about them was we were all in our various forms of agony, but he, if this can be even said, because it's not comparative and it doesn't it doesn't demonstrate itself in someone's demeanor or how they present themselves in a sort of qualified, you know, you can't quantify it like that. But my instinct and my impression of him was that he was in a lot more agony, turmoil, irresolvable turmoil that didn't seem to have the suggestion of answers than anyone else in there. And he was, you know, going into the details of his addiction, you know, he had got to the point where he couldn't leave his house or his home. He couldn't stop having sex with sex workers. He couldn't stop masturbating constantly. He couldn't stop watching porn. He could, you know, and this was in the time where it wasn't even as prevalent as it is now to be able to access it. And it struck me and yet there was something about sex addiction that was almost a sort of, there was a purity, if such a word could be used. It kind of, it sort of stripped back all of our issues down to an essential addiction. And sex addiction is about connection, and it bleeds into codependency. And I've been to there's a 12-step program, there's Sex Addicts, you know, 12-step program, there's Codependence Anonymous, and it's an incredibly complicated, complex addiction that exists. I hate these people who say, oh no, it doesn't exist, you're just a bad boy and all this kind of stuff. Now,
which we would have said before we got the language around addiction, wouldn't we? We've said, sorry,
absolutely, that's our post.
That's oh yeah, right, we're all sex addicts, but that's a deep misunderstanding of actually what goes on.
That said though, I do think it's a tricky one, because I think of all the things that we do, it's really hard to kind of choose your words around this, because obviously drug addiction, alcohol addiction, of course they all impact those around you, but essentially the damage is being done to yourself first, if you know what I mean. Whereas, whereas the sex addiction thing, I think a lot of people can use it who are badly behaved as an excuse. And you can't pretend that people don't use it like that. That's not to dismiss people who have sex addiction, but I think the problem with sex addiction is, where is that boundary? Where is that line between it becoming a profound, disabling addiction problem, and where is it a sort of actually a con to kind of justify bad behavior?
I was a bit confused as well. Maybe only told us one thing, that he'd been unfaithful once, it sounds like, and that there's then the porn thing. I mean, it's so complicated, isn't it, Mark? Like loving an addict, because you won't get the support of anybody else, because anybody that loves you is going to want to protect you and say, and of course you're only 22, I think, and you know, he wants this year of celibacy and he's asking you to wait. And I as I was reading your story, I was flipping from one side to the other because, of course, Mark and I, because I cherish our relationship so much, and my life would not be the life that I have if we didn't have this marriage. And, you know, Mark did have, you know, serious addictions that he's been sober from for 18 years. But it took a lot of work for you, a lot of work and dedication from you. And you'd had an awful lot of experiences and regrets before that to feed into you being able to stay sober. So that's what I wanted to ask you, Mark. Is the age thing, the fact that he's only 22, reduce the chances of his sobriety massively, do you think?
What do you mean? Sorry,
Well,
that his chances to get sober?
Yeah, like he's working so hard at all of this. Well, there's no guarantees he's gonna be able to stay sober, is there?
You know, I'm not going to say what this person should or shouldn't do, but if it was my daughter in this relationship, I would, in whatever way was possible, encourage them to, I don't know what the terms are these days in Love Island, you know, get back to some kind of mutually respectful friendship. I would name it as such. I would say, look, sit down, say, look, I want to be friends. I love you. I like you. But it's got to be platonic. It's got to be uncomplicated. And that is a huge pressure on this person if they love the person or attracted to the person as well. I mean, you know, we mustn't forget sometimes, you know, I can think of someone who, despite the nature of the person they're obsessed with, can't help but be attracted to them. And attraction is a thing, you know, being sort of finding someone alluring is a thing. But my advice to my daughter, and I often use this as a kind of, you know, bellwether or benchmark, I would say, get and define and state the terms of a friendship first. Given your ages, I would then say this guy, I presume, it has to take quite a considerable amount of time to work on themselves.
Well, he said that he wants to be celibate for a year.
But a year is nothing in the drop of addiction.
But this is the very difficult thing as well, isn't it? Like you cannot have a drop of alcohol because one is too much and 100 is never enough. And it's rather like food addiction and sex addiction is so difficult because you want sex and you want food your whole life.
Absolutely. And also it's like codependency. The difficulty, I've never been to a more sort of disabling 12-step program meeting than Codependence Anonymous, because of course everyone has relationships. Even if they're not sexual relationships. So sex addiction is a really hard one. It's a really hard one because, you know, I'm thinking of someone else who I've spoken to over the years who has had to, you know, has spent something like 7 years and talks about their cleanness in terms, their sobriety in terms of not having looked at pornography or not having looked at anything like that. But them also saying that some of the triggers around their addiction can be so many things that are permissible and permitted in society. So what I mean by that is over sexual. Imagine if your addiction or your drink is or being sober from your addiction or drink is to not see images of sex. And then we live in a culture where outside of porn, it's everywhere. And so the triggering effect of seeing something like that or coming across it in a show or in a program or, you know, all that kind of stuff is really, really hard to actually be abstinent. My advice still would be, you know, he wants to kind of do it for a year. I think you need to be a friend to this person. I think in some ways that will almost help you with those around you who love you, because it will be they will then see you as taking a sort of responsible, self-caring step with him. Because I understand it. My first instinct will be, right, Christ, okay, well, I'm sure he's got a problem. I even believe in sex addiction, but actually just park that to the side because you're my child and actually I want to protect you. And that's where they're coming from. They're coming from a place of wanting to look after you. They're not coming from a place of
They want life to be easier for you.
And they can see, it's like your parents with me. It would be preferable if you weren't with someone who was a raging addict. Preferable. And so I would say that this is really important that you state it loud and proud, both to him, to your family and to yourself, that this is definitively a friendship from here on in. And in some respects, you non-sexually, platonically hold his hand as he moves through his addiction. And I think at some point it might be worth going to, further down the way, if you're thinking, well, you know what, we'd like to actually get closer to each other, go to a specialized couples counselor of some form. You go to Al-Anon for all of the time in the interim.
Al-Anon, which is for family and friends of addicts. I was going to say that I think, I think it's a good way to think of it, Mark. If our daughter was sat here and the fact that he's very kind, kindness, there's not a lot of, listening to our daughters in the dating scene, there's not a lot of that about.
Yeah.
And to throw the baby out with the bathwater is what I'm hearing. Yes, he's got this problem, but people can have all kinds of problems. I mean, Mark always says that everyone should do a 12-step program because it makes us look, none of us are perfect. But I think I kind of agree with Mark, but I would tone it down a bit.
And on that note, it's a really important point, which I don't think gets said enough, actually, and we don't say it enough across all of our platforms. Everyone has compulsive, impulsive, and excessive behavior around countless things across their lives. I do think we fall foul of thinking someone is that, someone is this. I'm a recovering alcoholic. Look, I've used sex in my life in a way that I'm not proud of, or that would have tipped over and was tipping over into, some kind of fixing. What is any kind of addiction? It's about plugging something in yourself through the use of something else that kind of takes you out of your head. And you can understand why, the dopamine hit of sex, like drugs, like alcohol, like even codependent relationships. Because codependency isn't about just being stuck to someone like a mollusk. It's about departure, avoidant, attachment, avoidment. And so that toing and froing is the addiction. Sex, there's a more obvious sort of physical sense in which it happens, but it's never enough. And so it's really important. And so it makes it even more complicated, which is why I think he needs the time to work out how much of a problem he has, in a sense, and what sort of, treatment he needs.
So I was saying, if it was our daughter and we were sitting here, I would suggest exactly what Mark does, but I would pull back a bit from what Mark said, because I would worry about you being a close friend that's holding the hand through this. Maybe. Because I think that could become mixed signals for him. But I think, if at this point you want to say, you are really very meaningful to me, what I feel about, I see a deeply kind person, and I don't want to totally give up hope, but I have to protect myself and I have to give you room to get well, and I'll be your friend. Very much like what Mark said.
Maybe detach with compassion.
Yeah, detach with compassion. But what I would also suggest is, maybe you've already done this, but to really, really investigate addiction, read into it, look at it, go to some Al-Anon meetings, maybe even go to a sex addict meeting so you can hear the kind of, can you go to them? They're open, aren't they?
Yeah.
You can go to an open one and you can hear the kind of stuff that people are going through. But yes, I just want to validate your feelings about people just being too black and white about cheating, because you can have an extremely good person that makes mistakes, and yet we just have this blanket attitude to the mistake of infidelity. And so, again, just our opinions, but that's a very complicated situation for you. And I can hear you really deep thinking and very caring person. And I think, if what you say about him is true, there's a really good person in there as well.
Absolutely. But you've also got to protect yourself too.
Yeah.
Okay, so Shauna, how do I discuss my ADHD referral with my parents, who only see ADHD as a reason for criticism? In the words of my sibling, you've coped this well before. What's the point? If only you knew. Is not obviously what they said, it's what Shauna says. Yeah,
if only you knew. Well, for those who might be a new listener, both Mark and I have ADHD. I've had a fairly recent diagnosis. I don't know what it is now, 6 months or so, maybe not even as much as that. And it has been a life-changing experience for me. But just specifically to the referral, I think I had this real need to, after I'd had my diagnosis, to make everybody understand. If I was this and I'm sorry if and it might be because of this. And then I realised that this isn't going to be as important to anyone else as it is going to be to you and those very, very close to you. I found with my family as well that there wasn't any real interest in it. enough, but not much. And I felt a bit sad about that at the beginning. And then I just thought, no, everybody's getting on with their life. So really, I suppose my advice, well, my thoughts on this is just don't expect too much from people. And if you know that somebody is going to be a bit dismissive of it, don't have the conversation with them, because it hurts actually when somebody is dismissive. It hurts. So if you come from a family that's like, mental health, a load of navel gazing, you're not going to change that.
No.
In a minute.
No.
So this is just your referral. So get your referral out of the way. Get your diagnosis one way or the other. And if you are diagnosed with ADHD, spend that time for you. And that's what I realised was actually better for me. Do your research. I mean, I'm just an oversharer. I tend to want to share about everything. Do your research. Read. Really, it's fascinating to find this stuff out about yourself and have those moments. Find the people that are interested and do want to converse back with you. And those that don't, that's actually okay. People have got a lot of stuff going on, and you're not really going to change anybody's minds. I mean, there's a real feeling out there as well. There's a lot of stuff in the press. Oh, what, has everybody got ADHD? Oh, why don't just celebrities shut up about ADHD? Everyone's too aware these days, which of course I think is totally ridiculous. But you will come across a lot of that. So make this just almost like an enriching of your own relationship with yourself.
I think it's interesting though, because I think that phrase that your sibling, Shauna, says, you've coped this well before, what's the point? It's
so painful.
So painful. It kind of, well, no, but it goes towards the idea of kind of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why navel gaze, like you say? Why explore? Why do we want to go into it? And I mean, I can have some sympathy with that, having gone through almost every conceivable form of therapy and diagnosis, it feels. And like Nadia says, I'm diagnosed ADHD 2, bipolar 2. It used to be manic depression, addiction. I mean, bloody hell. You go through all of those things, and you do, you can get a little world weary, even as someone who's had all sorts of referrals and diagnoses and all that kind of stuff. But when push comes to shove, how can you ever be too aware? You can't be too aware. And I think, as Nadia says, this is for you. I think if you've got people around you, and I've seen it firsthand, who don't get mental health issues and don't want to get mental health issues, you know what? The only way you can possibly nudge them into some kind of acknowledgement is if you go for your referral, you do what's suggested, you may end up on medication, you may do some kind of therapeutics as well. They may see change, and you draw their attention to that change further down the way. Because if they say you've coped this well before, your line to your sibling could be, I want to cope even better, So it's kind of like, I think the proof will be in the pudding. And I think rather than feeling almost crushed or disappointed by their opinions, sort of feel enabled and emboldened and think, you know what, I'm going to do this for myself. And you know what, if this goes a different route and I improve and it helps me with this, they'll see that it was.
And I think it's important to sit with it for a minute that you're hurt and say, I'm hurt, and this doesn't feel nice. And I can think of many occasions with my family or friends or through my life where when people have just dismissed my feelings, it hurt. Sit with that for a bit. It's not about saying, oh, well, I shouldn't feel that. Sit with it and then take action, because the best thing that you can do when somebody doesn't see you is to have success, is to move forward with yourself. But I think it's a good point what Mark makes there, is that actually this is indicative of what so many people think about any mental health challenges, which is you're coping, all right?
Yeah.
We don't want to just cope. We don't want to just survive. We want to thrive.
Exactly.
And I think that's the line.
Final one. This is anonymous. Hi, I'm a quiet sub. We love you, quiet subs. I would so appreciate your thoughts and advice. I met a guy through a friend and we dated for 3 months. It was like a roller coaster. He did many strange things. He would not come to mine, always met at his. He'd go silent for days on end, tried to throw money at me, not literally, and was generally hard work. I ended it a few times, but took him back as we seemed to work through problems. He told me his fiancée of 9 years before had died, and I was the first woman since her. So this was a big reason I was so patient with him. Eventually, I had enough. I ended it for good. He'd been living at the other end of the country over the Christmas period, and had been saying for 2 weeks he was heading back to me. He let me down, so after a long chat and him promising me the world, even asking to move in together, which I said no to, I gave him another chance, and 2 weeks later, he let me down again. I ended it telling him it was a toxic relationship, etc., etc. So a week later, me and someone we mutually knew got a text from his sister saying he had taken his own life. I was obviously devastated. Anyway, here is the unbelievable part. My clever daughter smelt a rat and did some digging. Turns out he wasn't dead at all. He being the one, sorry to text that awful message, the police actually confirmed he was alive too, as I was able to give them his car reg number.
Unbelievable.
Also, the dead fiancée was alive. I remembered the name of her and a story of someone in his hometown had died, and he had attached himself to that story. I could not believe his intention was for me to go through life thinking I'd played a part in someone's suicide. An obvious psychopath, I hear you say. This all happened 2 years ago. However, I still can't get my head around it, and he even pops into my dreams. I have no love for this scumbag, but finding it hard to trust again. I was single for 8 years before I met him, so think that impacted me too. Sorry for the essay. Any advice would be gratefully received. I mean,
it's not an essay, and thank you for sharing it. And when I read this last night, I was literally horrified for you.
So look, I mean, the first thing to say that in terms of advice, I mean, I'm presuming the advice is on how to deal with the kind of, you know, the ramifications and the ripple effect of that. Well,
it's asking how do you trust again?
Well, yeah, well,
so
I mean, the one thing you probably need to hear just from the get-go is that is an extreme story. That is an extreme example of deceit, maliciousness, you know, a sort of psychopathy, sociopathy. I mean, you know, so the first thing I always use the example if it was my daughter, the first thing you have to do, and I have to say, is you're absolutely right to have had whatever traumatic response you've had to this, because often society and I mean, even when you sort of think of police and the, you know, rape cases, it's all about button it up, push it away, hide it, don't worry, don't feel it. And sometimes that can come from a very well-meaning perspective of don't feel anything about this. It's no, feel it. That's okay. That is I can't actually believe that story.
It's well, you know, there's a whole series, there's a podcast, a whole series, I think it's called Dirty Rats on BBC. You might be interested in it, BBC podcasts. And it's just one story after another like this. People are just disgusting, just appalling. To put you through that, I mean, let's just pause for a second, that you thought he'd committed suicide after you'd, you know, finished with him. It's just horrific. And I'm really glad that you don't anywhere in there say that you feel silly, because listening to this series that I have on the BBC, you know, all these women said they felt so silly. They felt like stupid, that they believed him, naive, all these things. I don't know whether you have felt that and you just haven't put it in, but I just wanted to say, if you do, you are victim shaming yourself, because you are a victim of an appalling human being. And they are very manipulative, these people. He's, you know, in my opinion, he sounds like a complete psychopath. And a psychopath is able to say anything and perform brilliantly to act, you know. So how do you move on from this? That's incredibly difficult. I mean, you say that you haven't had a relationship for 2 years. Well, you're licking your wounds. And you are caring for yourself, hopefully, and you are nurturing yourself. Pull the people closer to you that you do trust. Even if it's just one friend, even if it's just one family member, keep them close to you. Remind yourself of the good people out there, because the world, I mean, my family here, Mark and the girls, get really frustrated with me when I say there's more good people than bad. And I follow a lot of Instagram accounts with amazing stories of the people that are good out there, because it's almost like you have to fix that it's like it's gone at you with an axe, really, in a way, isn't it? Into shattered sort of any chance of you trusting somebody. But it is possible. But also what I would want to say is we are a couples obsessed society. And if you are perfectly happy, a few weeks ago we had a problem come in, didn't we? Where a woman was saying she was really happy and her son was just desperate for her to have a partner. You know, if you decide that actually, you know, you weren't with anyone for 8 years before that, and then this, actually, if you decide, do you know what? I just want to build a single life, pull more friends towards me, find more friends, and maybe if that's the way to go, and then if somebody pops up, if somebody does pop up, then that, and it feels right, then you go for it. I think you have a great instinct, because you said right at the beginning he was doing some strange things. And I remember recently saying to somebody that's having a bit of a problem with somebody that's saying, I said, sit down and write a list of the red flags. And they said to me, apparently, sitting down to write a list of the red flags means there's a great big red flag somewhere. So it is about listening to those red flags, really taking your time. If you do meet somebody else, say, I am not going to get involved with anyone till I've been a friend with them for years. I have to meet their family. I have to. It's okay for you to put in boundaries.
I mean, I would also say that, you know, anyone who's gone through what you've gone through will have experienced trauma. So you would be it would be well worth you looking into some kind of PTSD therapy, because, you know, that beyond him physically hurting you, that is abusive on an absolutely sensationally awful scale, you know, because. And then, of course, so that's one sort of what.
The fact that you still dream about him.
Yeah. What could you do that could potentially sort of quite, not quickly, but directly attend to the damage that he's done to you? He hasn't used a sort of a weapon. He hasn't hit you, but he has really, really damaged and hurt you. But in terms of the trust issues, I mean, the only thing I would say with this, again, if I'm thinking if my daughter had come out of this and sort of revealed this to me and she'd been hiding it and everything, my first thought would be, yes, it's going to take you time to trust again. Therapy is, you know, and I know it always seems like a catch-all going to therapy of some form, but I do think you're going to need some kind of therapeutic landing gear here to kind of come back down to earth, because this is very, very unusual and very extreme. And at the same time, something that Nadia often says, I think would be really important here. As you step to, and if you feel yourself stepping to or wanting to step towards a new relationship of any form, I would really advise you not at the beginning to share with whoever that is the extent to which you've gone through this, because, you know, inadvertently and indirectly and, you know, sort of subtly, it sends out a message to people. And I think in a sense, this is where you need your friends and you need your family to kind of protect you a bit. It's not about not telling someone you love in the future what you've gone through, but don't let it be the thing, because it's most fresh in your mind.
Also, you don't want to be the thing that defines you.
And you don't want it to be the thing that defines you. And also, you don't want it also to be the kind of thing that not attracts the same thing, but you just don't want to put it out there. It's like Nadia often says to our girls, don't tell them all your weaknesses. Don't tell them all the things. Not weaknesses, but, you know, all your hurts and all the behaviour that sort of happened to you, because you just don't want to leave yourself in any way vulnerable with it.
Your vulnerabilities, I suppose, is the best word. But absolutely, wow. And can we just give you a virtual hug?
Absolutely.
Because that is a lot. Yeah. And maybe check out that Dirty Rats podcast when you'll hear other women's stories. And I wonder if there are any groups for people that have been cheated to in this way, because sometimes just talking to other people that have been through, and also it's okay, as Mark says, I think it's a really good point, not to expose your vulnerabilities to somebody in a new relationship, but also it's also okay to say, you know, not everything in my relationship's past has been great, so I have some clear boundaries. Yeah. So I don't not see somebody's home, and I don't not meet the person's friends, and that's okay to say that.
I also finally just think, you know, in a weird way, well, not in a weird way, in an obvious way, that's it. That's coercive control and gaslighting to an extraordinary level. So there may be some benefit in talking to a sort of women's crisis group or refuge, because they deal with the behaviours of coercive control as much as sort of, you know, domestic violence. So they might be able to help you with some strategies for kind of coping with it.
And can I just do this one last one? This is from Alex. I lost my sister in December 2021 and then my father in July 2022 to cancer. My sister was not old. I feel my father passed away from a broken heart. I'm still here. I'm the youngest of 4 and I feel really numb. All I want to say on this is this just felt like this was the right moment, because I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who, when she lost her mother, she'd been to all kinds of different counsellors, and she said she went to Cruise, which is a charity that helps with bereavement. And she said it made such an enormous difference. So, you know, we are not qualified to help directly with grief counselling, but I just wanted to say that. And for anybody else, check out Cruise, because this friend of mine had an amazing experience with them. And I'm so sorry for your loss. And it's just awful for you. So sending big love. And to everyone that sent in
thank you.
their problems, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
It's a real honour to share with us these things that are just have just been huge in your life.
Yeah, and I hope we've been of some use. I mean, as we say, I think it's quite useful. I always plot myself into the position of, as a caring dad, what would I say to my children? I mean, I do that sometimes in my life where I perhaps have done something which I'm not comfortable with, or have said something. I think, well, hang on a minute, how would you feel if that was said to your daughter? Do you know what I mean? It's quite a good sort of filter to push stuff through, which is kind of what I think we do here. So, but yeah, thank you for, in a sense, sharing with us your vulnerabilities. So.
Sending lots of love to you all.